Didn't see the button from my view. Thank you. Okay, check to make sure. Looks like there's one more in the waiting room. Okay, I think everybody's in from the waiting room. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's Pi Gamma Mu speaker series. My name is Suzanne Rupp. I am the executive director of Pi Gamma Mu. Today's event will feature Dr. Johanna Bishop of Wilmington University. But before Dr. Bishop shares with us, I would like to share a few updates with you about Pi Gamma Mu. Our scholarship application deadline is coming up on May 1st of 2024. For many years, the annual deadline was February 15th. The awards committee has decided to move that annual deadline to May in order for students to become aware and apply for the scholarships. The scholarships are intended for students who are in their first graduate degree in a social science discipline, and the award amount has been increased this year to $2,500 for each award. So that is an increase over previous years. Let's see. Our convention is coming up, and it's also a celebration of our 100th anniversary. So the Pi Gamma Mu Centennial International Convention will be held on November 1st through 3rd this year at the DoubleTree Hotel in Center City of Philadelphia. It's a great location, so many great events. Please visit our website to learn more about that and to register. Let's see. Okay, I will stop sharing. And now we would like to take a few moments to do a couple housekeeping notes. If you're not speaking, please mute yourself. If you do have questions during Dr. Bishop's presentation, please put them in the chat box and we can look at those afterwards, or you can hold your question till the end and speak at that point. But before we introduce Dr. Bishop, we would like to take a minute to meet each of you. So I'm going to call on each of you, and what we would like to hear about you is your name, your chapter or your college or university, and what you're up to now, whether you're retired, whether you're teaching, whether you're a student, whatever you'd like to share in that vein. So I would like to start by asking Susan Kinsella, our board president, to introduce herself.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Kinsella, and I'm the Vice President of Academic Affairs at St. Leo University in Florida. I've also been involved with Pi Gamma Mu for probably way over 20 years. Currently the board president, and it's such a wonderful organization. I'm proud to be a part of St. Leo and a part of Pi Gamma Mu.
Thank you, Susan. Gordon Mercer.
Yes, I'm Professor Emeritus at Western Carolina University in the field of political science. I do chair the chapter and membership growth committee, and I'm proud to mention that in the last 3 years, we've grown 3% in membership. So that's pretty incredible in a rather difficult time.
Thank you, Gordon. Allison Knox.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison. I teach at the American Military University in the Emergency Management Department and also teach political science at 2 other universities. I am the Chancellor of the Southeast region for our Board of Trustees, and I'm delighted to have all of you here today.
Thank you, Allison. Dr. Charles and Dr. Mary Hartwig.
There we go. Unmute. Okay. Charles Harburg, Emeritus Professor of Political Science at Arkansas State University and Chancellor of the Southwest region of Arkansas, of Pi Gamma Mu. And this is my wife, Mary, who's listening in.
Thank you both for being here. Anna or Anna Estep?
Hi, yeah, it's Estep is the last name.
Right.
So I'm a full-time employee at Virginia Commonwealth University, part of the Virginia New chapter of Pi Gamma Mu. I'm also a part-time student. I am pursuing a degree in anthropology with a focus in archaeology.
Thank you. Belle Corley?
Hello, I'm Isabel Corley, and I am at the University of Charleston, and I am president of Pi Gamma Mu, the club on campus.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. Let's see here. Beth Biddle? I think you might be muted, Beth. Let's see. Try that again. I think Beth's having technical difficulties with muting. We'll move on to another person and circle back to Beth. Let's see here. Emily Byrer, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Byer. I joined through Indiana Wesleyan University about 25 years ago. Currently, I'm in the Boston area and I work with corporate events.
Thank you, Emily. Heather Parker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Parker. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts, Sciences, and Allied Services at St. Leo University. So I work with Dr. Susan Kinsella, and we are delighted to have Pi Gamma Mu amongst our many clubs, and it's one of our most active, so we're very appreciative of the club and what opportunities it gives for our students.
Wonderful, thank you. James Wigwich.
Yes, hi, Jim Wodowitz. I work at Rider University. I'm the faculty advisor for the group, and I'm in the sociology and criminology department, and I teach a course on victimology, so I'm very interested in this subject matter for sure, so thanks.
Yeah, thank you for being here. How
You bet.
about Kathy M?
Hi, everyone. Kathy M from the University of Maryland Global Campus, Maryland Theta chapter. I am the faculty sponsor there since 2008 and currently serving as the first vice president of the board of trustees of Pi Gamma Mu. I'm not sure if I said it, I'm program director of gerontology and behavioral sciences, and we have several classes dealing with domestic violence and trafficking. So very excited to hear what Dr. Bishop has to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Professor Padata.
Hey everyone, good morning from the Philippines. Good afternoon in America. I'm Jobert Padata. I'm from the Philippine Alpha chapter, inducted last year 2020 during the pandemic, and I'm working as a full-time college instructor at Cebu Normal University in the Philippines. It's my pleasure to meet you all here.
Thank you for being here from all that distance. It must be the middle of the night. Beth Biddle, are you available?
I think so. Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. Beth Biddle. I'm the Associate Director for Chapter Services at Pi Gamma Mu headquarters.
Thank you, Beth. Larry Bonura.
Hello, everybody. I'm a 40-year member, and I joined when I was at Emporia State University. And today I teach medical staff how to use Epic electronic health records at a hospital.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. Tamara DC.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tamara. I work in the School of Criminal Justice as an administrator. I've been at St. Leo for about 19 years. So retirement sounds good, but I guess I'm not ready yet for that. I work in the College of Arts, Sciences, and Allied Services, and this subject is very interesting to us. We have classes, we teach courses about it. We have an institute that deals with this and webinars often on this subject. So thank you for offering this today.
Thank you for being here. Haley.
Hi, my name is Haley Nesperly. I am a student at the University of Charleston and a member of Pi Gamma Mu here, and I'm a political science student.
Great, thank you. Monica Pina.
Hi. I went to Ashford University. They switched the name to the University of Arizona Global Campus. I graduated about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. I'm a police officer, just retired due to an injury, and I am actually interested in what this seminar is about.
Great. Okay, we have more and more people joining. I'm looking at the time. I think we will stop the introductions for now and move on to the next part of our program. If we have time at the end, we could add a few more introductions, but I don't want to spend too much time and take up Dr. Bishop's time. So I will hand it off to Dr. Suzanne Kinsella, who is the president of our Board of Trustees, and she will introduce Dr. Johanna Bishop for us today. Susan?
Yes, thank you, and welcome everyone. This is so exciting to have such a large group. We're delighted to see so many people from not only our country, but from the Philippines. So we truly are an international honor society. So thank you all for attending. Dr. Johanna Bishop is with us today. She's the assistant professor at Wilmington University in Delaware, and she will be presenting on the topic of human trafficking. Dr. Bishop is the director of behavioral science programs at Wilmington University, and she manages the undergraduate behavioral science program, the graduate human service program, and several undergraduate and graduate certificate programs. She is the founding sponsor of the Delaware Beta chapter of Pi Gamma Mu at Wilmington University, which is really a very active chapter with lots of activities for the students there. And she's also the governor of the state for Pi Gamma Mu for Delaware. In 2016, Dr. Bishop founded the annual Human Trafficking Symposium, and she now organizes monthly human trafficking webinars, which are free to the public and to professionals. So please help me welcome Dr. Johanna Bishop.
Well, thank you, everyone. Of course, just as I'm wont to do, I'm changing things up a bit because we do have people from so many. Can you see my share screen okay? I know it's different than what you expected, but I wanted to point something out to you because we do have somebody from the Philippines. And in my webinars, I offer monthly webinars at the last Tuesday of every month, and they're free to the public, but registration is required. And I always have people from the Philippines. So I wanted to point this out that next Tuesday on January 30th at 10 a.m., and because we have a law enforcement officer with us today, we have a retired FBI agent who will be talking about kidnapping and domestic violence and human trafficking in an international case. And that's retired FBI agent Scott Duffy. So you may be interested in that if you're available. And then in the afternoon, we have Truckers Against Trafficking actually presenting. So I just wanted to point that out to you. These are free webinars and each one of them is 1 hour long. So now with that said, I'm going to flip back to the beginning part of my presentation. And I want to do a proper thank you to Susan, for your lovely introduction. As Susan said, I've been working on raising awareness of human trafficking for quite a while. And when I first started raising awareness for human trafficking, people would look at me like I was crazy because they think that human trafficking occurs somewhere else, right? It doesn't really occur in the US. So I'm so happy to see so many of you here, and we have a terrific audience from a lot of different states. So today, we're going to be talking about a couple different things, and it's always, I get very excited about the opportunity to raise awareness and to educate people about human trafficking. So I have way more slides than we have time for. So some of the slides are just markers for me to remind myself to point things out to you. Some of the slides I'll go in a little more detail. Some of the slides I'll sort of gloss over. I am happy at the end of the day to send you the PDF version of this PowerPoint presentation. All you need to do is just contact me and let me know, and I'll share my email with you. So we're going to be talking about what is human trafficking. I'll share with you the different forms of human trafficking, because when we talk about human trafficking, we always think that it's sex trafficking, and it's not. There's a whole lot of labor trafficking going on too. We will talk about how victims are recruited. We'll talk about why victims don't always seek help, because contrary to popular opinion, victims are not chained up. They're not locked up. They walk the streets freely. They have cell phones. So the common question always is, why don't they seek help? Survivors of trafficking experience a lot of different kinds of trauma, and we'll talk about that kinds of trauma and what makes it so difficult for people in the helping professions, counselors and social workers and others, to help people who have experienced that kind of trauma. And then we'll talk about how we can recognize human trafficking and, you know, what steps can we take to kind of disrupt it. I'm not naive enough to think that raising awareness is going to eliminate human trafficking. It's something that's been with us as long as mankind has been in existence. However, it is rather shocking that in 2024, with all the technology we have available to us, that we should still have people who are caught in a web where they've lost their freedom, where they're coerced to do things they normally would not do, where they've lost their freedom and feel compelled to be treated as slaves. It's a form of modern day slavery. So in terms of where does human trafficking exist in the United States, this is a map that was put together by the Polaris Project. It's an NGO, a non-government entity. It works in collaboration. It's a nonprofit that works in collaboration with the government. And you will see everywhere where these gray spots are, that's where human trafficking has been detected and documented and recorded, not only by the criminal justice organizations in this country, but, you know, the FBI as a criminal justice organization, Department of Homeland Security, they track all of that. And Susan and I were talking earlier, she's from Florida. Florida, Texas, and California are the three top most popular states, and states that have the heaviest concentration of human trafficking. And that is because those are coastal states and border states. But you also see in the northeast part of the country, you know, you'll see that, you know, Massachusetts all the way down to, yes, Delaware, New Jersey, and Virginia, that's a very heavy area for human trafficking. And then you might not suspect that human trafficking exists in the middle of the country, but it does. So what does human trafficking look like? Well, here's a sad case that gives you an example. This is Jaden. Jaden was a child who was caught in the foster care system. In 1 year, she was shifted amongst 12 foster care homes. Foster care across the country has been sourced out and privatized because there are not enough government subsidized foster care homes. So they've sourced it out to agencies who will then find privatized foster care systems. Traffickers, sex traffickers in her neighborhood, and there are sex traffickers in different neighborhoods, caught wind of it They were watching her. So they actually trapped her in their web, and she died on January 11th, 2021 in the bathroom of a Studio 6 motel in Jacksonville, Florida. The South Florida Sun Sentinel exposed the complicity of the foster care system, along with evidence that was found in government records. And you look at this little girl and you think how horrible and how sad that this child was in foster care and then caught up and taken in this web of sex traffickers and sold just like merchandise to different people for sexual services. Another kind of case of human trafficking is labor trafficking. And this was a case from about a year ago that was reported in January 2023, where federal investigators were looking into whether 50 children, some of them as young as 13, most of them were 13, 14 years old, these children went to school during the day and they would work the night shift at night, facing dangerous conditions. And what they would do is they would perform sanitation services in a meatpacking industry, in a meatpacking complex. They would handle dangerous chemicals. The children were found to have chemical burns on their hands. So the Department of Homeland Security investigated, and they were interviewing the children. When this was reported, this was still a live investigation. So yes, labor trafficking, it's adult labor trafficking, but it's also child labor trafficking. So I'll talk a little bit more in a bit about different kinds of labor trafficking. Before we go any further, I would like to point out some books. I'm always being asked by people, can you give me some reading material or recommend reading material that would educate me a little bit more on different kinds of human trafficking? And these are the 5 books that I think are very good beginning books. They were all memoirs written by survivors of trafficking. I have known each one of these people personally, spoken with them, several of them. 3 of them have been my keynote speakers at my conferences that I used to do before the pandemic every year, before I went to webinars. The others I have met and personally interviewed and spoken to and had interactions with. So one of the things that we think of when we think of human trafficking, and especially sex trafficking, we think of the prostitutes and the women on the street. And we never seriously start to think about our youths and the risks to our youths. And it is very interesting that we should now be talking about the risk of youths in high school, especially as we have more undocumented immigrants coming across the border. Now, please don't think that I'm against undocumented immigrants. I am not. I am an immigrant to this country myself, not undocumented, but I am an immigrant to this country, so I have a strong attachment and love to protecting immigrant people. But this is an exact case. This is not the picture of the true person, and the identity of the people are, you know, they're given fake names. But this came from a journal article that I captured. And this is the case of Harris High School. And this is an example of a high school where there's a strong community of people from Guatemala, the Honduras, and El Salvador. And a 16-year-old sophomore in that high school had parents who were undocumented. Obviously, these parents were working in low-level jobs. This girl was the oldest of 3 children, and when her parents were working, she would take care of her younger siblings. During the pandemic, her mother lost her job in the hospitality industry. Before the pandemic, this girl, B, had, she and her friends had set up an online dating profile just for fun. And you know, teenagers do things without really thinking it through, and they do things for fun. And had the pandemic not happened, chances are nothing would have happened. But the pandemic led to the lockdown. And so B met a boy named Ronnie. She thought he was a boy. She met Ronnie online. She shared personal information with him, which consequently led her to meet up with him in person. And she then became intimate with him. He gave her money to help her parents, and he bought her new clothes and a phone. So you can imagine now, this is the lockdown. This is a teenage girl who's isolated, And, you know, she's met this guy who's just giving her all this attention and giving her wonderful things and showering her with affection. But guess what happened? A few months later, he said to her that she also needed to contribute. And we'll talk a little bit, but I think you can guess what that means. So what is the current state of human trafficking in the United States? Data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics shows that a total of 2,027 persons were referred to the U.S. attorneys for human trafficking offenses in the year of 2021. And that is the latest data that the Bureau of Justice Statistics has right now. It's a 49% increase from the 1,360 persons referred to in 2011. Now that 2011, I mean, the way they take some of this data, yes, you've all done research work. I've done research work. And you kind of look at the numbers, you think, you're looking at a long time span. But you have to look at it overall. Human trafficking is still a rather new crime being pursued. And you look at the increase, and that's encouraging because it wasn't that long ago that law enforcement was not really looking at human trafficking, even though the TVPA was enacted in 2000. So the number of persons prosecuted for human trafficking has doubled between 2011 and 2021. More defendants have been charged in federal court for human trafficking offenses. And there are more defendants charged with human trafficking crimes and offenses who are being locked up. So overall, that's encouraging, even though I look at the numbers and I think, oh, those numbers are so low. We have to do a better job. But then again, I have to think it's getting better. This year, and here's an indication of it getting better. All of the reports up until this time have focused on women and children, particularly girls, because women and girls are at the greatest risk for being sex trafficked. This year, the Department of State each year releases the Trafficking in Persons report. And in January 2023, they released the latest Trafficking in Persons report. It is a global Trafficking in Persons report, by the way. It's not just in the US. It was the first Trafficking in Persons report that revealed that there's been an increase in trafficking of boys and men. And here is what made me feel, it's a terrible thing, but it made me feel so good about that. Because I have talked to enough boys and men who have been trafficked for different reasons. Sex trafficking, yes. Pornography, yes. Labor trafficking, yes. But as a mother of daughters and as a mother of sons, it is always in my mind the risk that happens to boys and men. And I cannot tell you the number of men I have talked to who were abused as children, just like girls were, and who later also wound up being trafficked. So the reason this is encouraging, because we're seeing that human trafficking is not just a risk to the female population, it's also a risk to the male population. So there's a typology of human trafficking that was actually researched by the Polaris Project, and they put this together about, well, we're in 2024, so this would be about 9 years ago. They wanted to see, what does human trafficking look like? And you can see they created a list based on research. They found 25 different business models of human trafficking. Trafficking is not just in illicit massage, health and beauty services or escort services, but it also includes traveling sales crews, carnivals, healthcare, restaurant food services. I'm just listing a few. Hotels and hospitality, forestry and logging, factories and manufacturing, peddling and begging. You know, you see a lot of the sales crews and peddling and begging crews. So human trafficking is much broader than that. As I mentioned earlier, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act which is the law that governs and defines human trafficking, was first enacted by Congress on October 28th, 2000. It's been reauthorized a couple of different times, and every time it's been reauthorized, it has been expanded. It has been expanded to add different protections to the victims of trafficking and to add additional mandates. For example, additional mandates to the law enforcement agency for additional training that they have to meet and different compliance for the Department of Corrections, just to expand the whole umbrella of what is human trafficking and how do we manage looking at human trafficking offenses. So in order for somebody to be defined as trafficked, they have to meet 3 criteria, except for minors under 18. Minors do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. But so for an individual to be trafficked, they have to have been recruited, harbored, moved, or somehow be obtained through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, or sexual exploitation. A minor, for example, has to be recruited, harbored, moved, or obtained for sexual exploitation, slavery, debt bondage, does not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And this is an important point when somebody actually comes forward and says, I think I've been trafficked, I want to get out of the situation, but that person may be a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old, because they do not have the wherewithal to actually say no or realize what's going on. And so that has been one of the exemptions for minors. So let's talk about the different kinds of child sex trafficking in the United States. And this is really differentiated by who's benefiting financially. So the most common one is the pimp-controlled one. And that's usually the individual actor. Maybe usually one guy will have a couple of girls who are known as his stable, right? He often poses as the boyfriend, and he takes time to groom the girls. He takes time to earn their trust before he has them turn tricks. Once he has the girls under control, he may use emotional or psychological coercion, physical violence. Quite often, he also will tell the girls that nobody wants them back now. They can't go back to their family or their life because nobody wants them back. They're worthless. Or he'll say, I know your family. I know where you live. Or, hey, I know you have a little sister. And so he implies that threat or violence. If a girl is really being cooperative, he'll start slipping her drugs. Usually, the girls who are being trafficked start doing drugs on their own as a coping mechanism. The pimp will not automatically give the girls drugs because that costs them money. But they will only do that when they have a non-cooperative girl. So the other model is a family-controlled trafficking ring. So here's Ming Dong. This is actually Ming Dong. She's a former executive director of Don't Sell Bodies. She's a survivor of family-controlled sex trafficking in the San Francisco area. Her parents groomed her via sexual abuse and began selling her for sex when she was 10 years old. And Ming said that her father raped her from the age of 3 until she left at the age 20. Here we have gang-controlled model of trafficking. This is Teresa Flores. She's a survivor of gang-controlled child sex trafficking in Detroit. She wrote in her memoir, The Slave Across the Street, that gang traffickers lured her. What happened was she had a crush on a high school boy, and she really had a bad crush on him. And one day when he asked her out on a date, she went home with him to his house afterwards, even though she knew she shouldn't. He offered her a Coke, and he had slipped some drugs in the Coke. And while she was drugged, he raped her. And photos and videos were taken of that rape. And then he blackmailed her with that afterwards. It was really horrendous to her because he then sold her to other male members of his ethnic community, and it was gang controlled trafficking. Interestingly enough, Teresa was the daughter of a very well-to-do family, but she never ever told her parents about it. The car of the guys would come by in the middle of the night, and she would slip out her bedroom window and work all night, you know? And then her parents would wonder, her grades dropped at school. They thought that she was just turning into a bad girl. They never knew what happened until her father came home one day and said his job had transferred him to Connecticut. And not until she was in Connecticut did she tell her parents what happened. So imagine as a teenage girl living with that and then explaining what happened. Organized crime control. This is Chandra Waruntu. She's from Indonesia. She was a survivor of organized controlled sex trafficking. She was lured from Indonesia in 2001. And this is a model that happens quite often with young women from abroad, with promises of waitressing work at a major hotel. Once she was in the US, they took her passport and her papers and they forced her at gunpoint to work in a brothel. She was transported and sold within the traffickers' international organizational network. So those are just some models of sex trafficking and how sex trafficking works. Now, labor trafficking, very similar model. There's forced labor where victims are forced to work under fear of punishment, meeting quotas. They fear threats from the traffickers and must work in order to avoid negative consequences, which can be beatings and, harm and threats to their families. Debt bondage is something a little different in that the victims are forced into labor to pay back a debt and that they were not told about. And that often happens when the victims are promised a job with wages and the victims sign on to go with this trafficker, and they usually take him to a different place. But then when they get to that place, the trafficker will say, now you have to pay me back for your uniform. You have to pay me back for the food I give you to eat. You have to pay me back for your housing. And they add tremendous interest to that. So now these people are trapped. And because these people are usually undocumented, they have no recourse. They're very hesitant to turn to authorities because they have learned in their home country to never trust authorities. Okay, this is the shocking one that I want to tell you about. And I'm going to tell you about this one because I read about this and I thought, I don't know. This sounds kind of crazy. Until last year, I was reaching out to my audience, a webinar audience, and I asked some of my webinar audience members who wants to do a webinar. Which one of you have something you want to offer that you would like to work with me and do a co-presentation? And there's a gentleman, he's on LinkedIn, and there's a gentleman called Patience Fury. He lives in Malawi, and he signed on to do a webinar. At the last minute, he couldn't do it because his internet wasn't working. Now, I'm going to tell you, that's real. I spent Christmas break in Tanzania, and lovely, lovely country. And I don't want to make it sound like, that all of Africa or parts of Africa are that backward, because they're not. I was in Tanzania in a developed area. I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, by the way. And there's internet there, but there are times of the day that for no unknown reason, the internet goes down. Electricity goes down. So at the last minute, Patience was not able to do this, and he still wants to do this webinar with me. So I'm trying to get him back. But in Malawi and in other parts of the world, Patience says that in Malawi in particular, 80% of the people are uneducated, and they are so poor that traffickers have come in and they will tell people that I will give you money. We just need to give you an operation. Sometimes they tell them that they want to remove a kidney, and don't worry, you have two, you can live without one. And sometimes they will tell people something else, and the people don't understand what's happening, but it's okay because they're getting money and it's helping them take care of their families. So organ trafficking and transplant tourism is a real thing. Shocking as it may be, it is a real thing. So I can't wait to have patients come back and be able to do a webinar with him. So what are the lessons learned so far? The lessons we've learned so far is that human trafficking exists globally and locally. It is recognized by the US as a criminal problem, and we all know it's also a social problem that impacts our communities and society. There are many types of trafficking. Cases of human trafficking have recently been reported in the news, and trafficking is generally divided into labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So let's now talk about risk factors. So there are risk factors for people going into trafficking or being trafficked. Poverty is a huge risk factor. Dysfunctional families and child neglect. Childhood molestation. A lot of the people who wind up being trafficked as adults into the sex industry or pornography industry have been abused, sexually abused as children. A lack of family security or extended family support. So those of you working in the field or teaching in the academic area of families family security, please talk about human trafficking. And I don't know how we can strengthen families. There's a lot of government and public policy programs that need to be examined and strengthened. So again, for our public policy people, there's absolutely a lot of work that can be done there. Lack of opportunity. We have seen our society spread more and more between rich and poor. Parental substance abuse, as we see more and more parents using substances. The foster care system. We have runaway youths, peer pressure, school gangs, youths with low self-esteem. In a study that was conducted at UPenn and Loyola of New Orleans, 1/5 of homeless youths have been trafficked. 19.4% of the victims of human trafficking actually, have been trafficked across the country. I mean, across 2 studies, they show that 15% of the respondents have been trafficked for sex, 7.4% have been trafficked for labor, and 3% have been trafficked for both. So LGBTQ individuals are really being trafficked heavily for survival sex, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The studies also found that a lot of the respondents have been trafficked for survival sex or engaged in sex to trade in some way, just for housing or getting some food. So yes, traffickers realize this and they use a grooming process. The boyfriend model, which I mentioned earlier, you've heard me talk about the family controlled, the gang controlled, organized crime controlled. Other methods of recruiting are bait and switch, like I'll offer you a job and then the person gets to that job and, this is especially true for undocumented immigrants or other people from other countries. They'll take their papers away. Grooming children is something that makes you sick to your stomach, because when an adult grooms children to talk about sex, make jokes, and expose a child to pornography and engage children in fondling, and then makes it okay to have sex with the victim, that's a way of grooming. Into labor trafficking, quite often the traffickers in labor trafficking will be people who are known in the villages from which they traffic their prey and bring them across the border. They will make promises that include housing, education, and they'll bring them across to America or Europe, to the developed countries. Are there any questions so far? I realize I'm going quite fast. All right, I'll continue on here. Holly Austin Smith was one of my keynote speakers. She was 14 when she ran away with a man. And she said that she had been sexually abused by a cousin, and she told her mother about that one time. And her mother refused to believe her. And she then told her sister about it, or her teacher about it at school. And her teacher said, are you sure? The teacher asked her time and again. So she really told the whole story to the teacher because she had to get it out. And of course, what does the teacher do? The teacher tells the social workers, because teachers, they're mandatory reporting. And the social worker then has to call the family. You have to notify the authorities. Her mother and father were called into school. And then, her mother and father were mortified. And then Holly was basically told that she was a bad girl and she was unruly and she was the one who was at fault. So by the time she was 14, she was absolutely miserable. She was hanging out with a couple of girls in the mall. The summer of she was 14, she wasn't old enough to work, so the girls would go to the mall. And she noticed this young man was catching her eye all the time. And by the third time she went to the mall, she started hanging back from her friends and she started hanging behind them, and he caught up to her and they started talking. And after just a couple of times, then she went out to coffee with him. And one more time after that, he knew by that time she had dreams of becoming a singer. He promised her that he knew people in the music industry. She went away with him to Atlantic City. By the time she got to Atlantic City, he then handed her over to another man who then took her to a motel where there was another girl waiting for her who dyed her hair, put her in another dress. And that night she was put on the street and told to avoid police. And in Holly's words, she said, that night I was sold to a man for $150. And basically, she said, I got in the car and that man was old enough to be my grandfather. And he actually said to her, you remind me of my granddaughter. Police officer who saw her on the street yelled at her and he said, you don't look like you're old enough. And instead of turning to the police officer and getting help, she ran in the other direction. So that gives you an indication how this can all work when somebody is so scared and so frightened. Barbara Amaya is another woman I've had spent a lot of time with. She was one of my keynote speakers as well. She spent the first 12 years of her life in Northern Virginia. When she was 10 years old, family members abused her. Her book is a very, very raw book. If you have time to read it, please read it. She ran away from home and she was in DuPont Circle, and a woman saw her sitting at the bench and, came up to her, started talking to her, took her to Starbucks for a cup of coffee. Next few days, that woman took her to a store, bought her clothes, put her in a black wig, started grooming her. And then a couple of days later, went back to DuPont Circle, and she was handed over to a man who pulled up in a car, and that man was Moses. And Moses took her to New York City, where he trafficked her for 10 years. And I don't want to spoil the story, but you really need to read that story. It's horrendous. What Barbara went through, it's amazing that she came out of it absolutely alive and that she pulled herself out of it. She really paid a price because she suffered a lot. She suffered a lot, and she's a lovely person and didn't deserve all of that. Teresa Flores, her book, when she writes about how she was drugged and raped and tortured and kept in bondage. Yeah, that's another interesting, good book. Tina Frunt runs Courtney's House in Washington, D.C. It's a home for survivors of human trafficking girls. she's not written a book, but her story, if you go online, her story is interesting to read. She came from a family that was not a very functional family. And, you know, she met a guy and he was a lot older. He was like in his 30s, and she didn't think anything of it because this is an example of when somebody showered her with all the affection that her parents were not giving her. And, you know, he told her she was mature for her age and that she understood him better than his friends did. And then he said, I want to take you home to meet my family. And taking her home to meet her family was taking her out of where she was, which I think it was in the Chicago area, took her to Cleveland. But his family meant meeting 3 other girls, which was his stable of trafficking other girls who worked as prostitutes. And yeah, she had to work for him for a number of years. So yes, it takes a toll on somebody to really have to endure this. So survival sex is simply exchanging one's body for classic and basic subsistence needs, including clothing, food, and shelter. So the US figures that the homeless youth population is around 1.5 million. These are the kids under 18 who were either kicked out of their homes because their parents didn't have any money or couldn't take care of them anymore, or the parents were on drugs and just, you know, there was no home at all. I remember I was teaching at a community college a number of years ago, and there was a special program at the time, a federally funded program for women, single women who had children, to come back to school and get a college degree and get a college education. It was at a community college. And I remember one of my students submitted an essay in which she described being a teenager and her mother telling her, mother said, you have to go out and get yourself a baby because I can't take care of you anymore. Because her, you know, having a baby herself meant that she would get some government subsistence. So that's the reality of the lives that some of our youths are living in. Are there any questions so far? If not, I'll go ahead and continue. I'm looking at the time as well. So how does the trafficker manipulate his victims? First phase is to recruit. Traffickers generally identify a potential victim. They don't just randomly go in and grab. They usually take their time and identify somebody. And then they have that initiation period, and then they actually indoctrinate. They gain control over their victims by initiating them into the culture of trafficking. So they also will move their victims around geographically. A lot of the girls or victims who've been trafficked will tell you when they come out of it, or if they've been identified by police and they somehow wind up in the law enforcement space, victims will tell you, I don't know where I am. You know, they just know they're being moved. And isolating victims from the locale where they entered into trafficking is a way of manipulating victim. Traffickers will also dismiss questions. They'll minimize the importance of the victim. They will alternate showing care and brutalizing the victim. One minute they'll say, I love you so much, you're the best. And the next time they will actually beat them and be absolutely horrible with them, because this keeps them off balance. This makes somebody never know exactly what's happening with them. And that establishes that trafficker's authority on people. So that brings us to the next thing. If they're walking around free, why do they stay, right? Because they also have cell phones. Well, you have to imagine this. I'm going to skip over this one. The victim now came from a background that was not very stable, and the trafficker paid attention to what the victim wanted. The fact is, it created a trauma bond. The victim now seeks safety and survival, and the trafficker, in a certain way, represented some safety and survival for that victim. Okay? So there is an emotional bond that occurs in the abusive relationship, just as it does with domestic violence. So it's easy to mistake abuse as love, and the abuse, when it's alternated with kindness, does that. Also, the victim will feel indebted to the abuser because they do know that they have a place to go to every single day, that they won't be kicked out by their family, for example. An example of this is Elizabeth Smart. You all may remember the Elizabeth Smart case from 2003. She was 13 when she was actually kidnapped out of her bedroom, right? Her captors were a man and a woman who took her with them. And during the 9 months that Elizabeth was held captive, she was dressed in, a veil and a robe and everything. They walked about town freely. And Elizabeth reported later, when she was discovered and she was actually rescued, that she would see the posters and the signs, but she never felt that she could actually go back to her family because she felt she had been so dirtied and sullied. And, one of the first things that she asked about when she was in the police custody, she asked about the welfare of her captors. Later, she did explain. She said, well, I wasn't really concerned about them, but, that was much later when a lot more therapy had occurred. So we really don't know. But today she really is an advocate for young girls and protection of children. But the interesting part about it is so hard when a victim has been identified, and law enforcement will identify victims. It is so hard for victims to turn on the traffickers. And it's hard for them to come out of it because they'll deny that they're a victim. They're fearful of what will happen to them. They're fearful of what will happen to the trafficker, because traffickers have a way of finding their victims and getting them back. They have fears around their own safety and privacy, and they have been so indoctrinated in thinking that the police are the enemy. So it's very, very hard to actually get a victim to turn on the trafficker. So it is very important to practice approaching victims with sensitivity, to practice being prepared for rejection, being patient, and accept the fact that you may not get all the answers from the victim the first time. So the lessons learned are there are risk factors, there's a grooming process, there's a lot of manipulation, there's trauma bonding, and victims may fear leaving their traffickers. So what types of trauma is experienced by victims of trafficking? They have physical trauma, sexual trauma, psychological trauma, emotional trauma, developmental trauma, especially for the youths who are trafficked. And then there's a loss of place and identity. They've lost their place and identity of who they were before they were trafficked. Then they developed a sense of place and identity while they were trafficked because they're always being given a new name. The name that they were born with or given by their parents is long gone. And now they come out of trafficking to reestablish a new identity is something entirely new. So there's a lot of trauma. So, there's an example here that I've taken from a trafficking survivor years after leaving her life. She still wanted to talk with a trafficker. There's somebody who had a question. Barbara Amaya, who I talked with her, the last time I met her in Washington, D.C., to have a conversation with her and have a cup of coffee with her for no other reason, just to, be a friend, sort of. Or maybe it was the next to the last time. I remember her saying before her trafficker died, she said, I still always wanted to talk to him and find out why he did what he did. That was a strong reaction. And I can understand that, wanting to know why he did what he did. So also, trafficking survivor never reports of familial sex trafficking to authorities because the perpetrators were family members. And the other thing that happens is trafficking survivors do not want to testify against traffickers because he thinks that the trafficker did help him get to this country. And that happens a lot with people who are trafficked and crossed borders. The psychological trauma is often seen as changes in physical and emotional reactions, being easily startled or frightened, always being on guard, self-destructive behavior, problems sleeping. You can see that on and on. There's a strong sense of shame and guilt. They blame themselves for their situation. There was a study done on shame and guilt amongst trafficking victims and the relationship to PTSD and suicide. There's a very important element of shame, and we need to pay attention to shame. And if anybody is interested in doing more research on shame, it's a very good field to really take a look at, because that negative evaluation of the self really requires a lot of frontal cortical processing. Human survival is based on social connection, and shame is associated with stress-related physiological responses, and it impacts the physiological health. So, that really is an important factor in recovery for a lot of victims. So the lessons learned here are the types of trauma experienced by trafficking victims are multiple: physical, psychological, cognitive, emotional, trauma of loss of past lives, connection to family, friends, and place. And survivors should be assessed for shame and guilt during the psychological process. So how can we help victims? We need to be careful about being a savior to them. We need to help them understand how they are being trafficked, develop trust, communicate. We need to develop long-term goals toward independence. The difficulties in providing treatment is that a lot of victims will be resistant at first. They'll be guarded. For some victims of labor trafficking, there'll be language barriers. Often there is a lack of funding to provide all the services they need: dental services, medical services, training, housing. The community needs to come together and also understand that sometimes victims will go back to their traffickers because that's what they know. Sometimes they'll cycle back and forth. In medical settings, many victims will come into contact with medical professionals, particularly in the emergency room, while they're being trafficked. And medical professionals need to ask these questions, because it's a red flag when a patient is accompanied by another person who's always talking for them. And that person may be a man, but it may also be a woman who takes on the role of the aunt, the cousin, the friend, the sister, whatever. But when the patient is not allowed to talk for themselves, or that person who accompanies them never wants to leave them, that medical professional needs to be able to separate the patient from that person. And that can be a very difficult thing to do, but that's very important. We're getting near the end here, but the important part also is to understand when victims are arrested. Sometimes victims are arrested, yes, for trafficking offenses. They're charged with a criminal behavior. And once they are over the age of 18, which many victims, when they come out of trafficking, can be over the age of 18, they need to work on record expungement. And usually there are attorneys who will provide pro bono services, but that record expungement process can take years. And in the meantime, it's hard for those people to find jobs. We need to be careful about cultural awareness and providing care for victims. As I mentioned earlier, frustration with recidivism. And we need to understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs and why victims will tend to cycle back and forth, because they still will, even if they've come out of trafficking, they will somehow miss their trafficker because they have a need for interpersonal relationships. If they've been in that situation for a couple of years, they will turn to that person for their love needs or their connecting needs. But then they may leave and come back to you for care. All right. So I'm going to start wrapping it up because I'm looking at the time. I would suggest that you turn to Walking Prey to look for tips for parents for how to protect your children from predators. The Department of State has these, I think there are 25 of them, tips for looking and recognizing human trafficking. And the lessons that we have to learn about is that human trafficking exists everywhere. Working for victims of trafficking is not the same as working with victims of sexual assault. Understanding the complexity of working with victims and survivors of human trafficking is much different, and it's a difficult experience. Additional survivors services are needed in communities. We need better legislation and more legislation and assistance regarding record expungement. More human trafficking education needs to take place, and we need to work towards building resilience within the people who have been trafficked. So as a reminder, next Tuesday, these are 2 webinars. Each one, human trafficking is such a broad subject that each one of the webinars I offer focuses on a different aspect and an area, and there's so much to learn. The more I've gotten into this, the more I have learned. It's amazing. If you have questions, this is my email. I feel free to ask you to contact me. I'll be happy to share these slides with you in a PDF version. And with that, I will stop sharing and open it up to questions.
I have a question, Dr. Bishop.
Oh, please
This is
call me
Suzanne.
Johanna. Dr. Bishop's way too formal.
Okay, Johanna, thank you. Well, first of all, what an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for that. The question I have is related to the male youth. It's good to see that there's more awareness about that. I'm wondering if young males are pulled into trafficking situations in a different way than is typically seen by females. I know there's several ways, but what are the major differences you would see there?
From what I've learned, because it's a newer area, but what I've learned, it's commonly starts off with, oh, we have a modeling contract. You need to earn some money. We have a modeling contract for you. And then that modeling contract becomes a pornography gig. And it becomes a pornography, whether it's film or video, or it could just be photos. It may start off with photos. The traffickers are very good. The traffickers are amazing. They are amazing at judging characters and at gauging what people will do and how far they will go initially. And once they learn that somebody initially will only probably do pictures, then after a while, that person has been indoctrinated, and now they will probably get them into doing porn videos. And that's where a lot of the males wind up.
Thank you. Yeah, enlightening and frightening at the same time. Yeah.
Technology has made it worse. Some of the bigger police departments throughout the country now have set up, they actually have squad people whose job is to really monitor porn. They know about porn agencies, and they can't just go in and arrest them without evidence, obviously, but there are police officers, both male and female, who will go online in certain sites. Backpage, remember Backpage? Backpage used to be a big online site that used to advertise all sorts of services. It was a dating app. It was you could buy and sell stuff. It was a way to connect with people, and then it became traffickers were selling people on Backpage. It was incorporated in Delaware, and then Backpage was shut down. And everybody claimed victory. Oh, we've got human trafficking squashed because Backpage is shut down. No. Traffickers just found other different vehicles and splintered to different areas online to find different ways to sell people. So law enforcement is online now much more to try to find these different sites to entrap them, basically. I mean, that's the only way they can really make a dent in it. But technology has become very difficult because young kids and teenagers are online. They're on dating sites. They're on social apps. Some of them are hidden behind games, and that's why when you have little children, you want to, as a parent, be so very, very careful about what games you allow your children to play, because behind some of the games are connecting sites, and then somebody will come on. It's not uncommon for somebody to pose as a 15-year-old boy to your 13-year-old daughter, who your 13-year-old daughter is thrilled because a 15-year-old boy now wants to pay attention to her. That 15-year-old boy may be a 45-year-old man, okay? And that 45-year-old man may be doing that around the country to 400 other kids. There was actually an FBI case some years ago in which that happened. And the FBI was able to trap this guy, but the number of lives that were ruined and the number of families that have fallen apart, it's just horrible. Because when parents find out their kid has done something horrible to his siblings, and the kid only did it because the kid was being blackmailed by this guy, right? This 50-year-old kid then revealed himself to be a 45-year-old guy and said, okay, now you have to do this. And the kid is mortified. Yeah, you can just imagine. These things have happened. I'm not making it up.
I have a question.
It just makes me sick to my stomach.
A few years ago, there were signs all over airports regarding, if you notice this type of thing, please report it. But we've traveled recently and have not seen that. And so I'm just wondering if that mode of increasing awareness is no longer working, or is it still working?
Oh, it's still working. And not all airports have that, as a matter of fact, because I remember about 6-7 years ago flying into Cleveland, and Cleveland had that. I took a picture of it. And I fly out of Philly, and Philly is a major airport, right? Nothing like that existed in Philly. Philly just now started it. Those signs usually are, funded, and it depends. The signs stay up for as long as that funding lasts. Interesting Tuesday, I'm going to have Truckers Against Trafficking present, Dylan Wecht. And Truckers Against Trafficking has really been working with all of the transportation industry and educating all of the, railways, airlines, all of the transportation industry on recognizing the signs of trafficking. But yes, it's ongoing. I don't know where you are, why some of the signs have been taken down, but there are other places where the signs are just going up. In my state, in Delaware, legislation has just been enacted where signage has to go up in restaurants and in women's restrooms, for example. We don't know if that's going to help or not, but you just never know. Because recognize that women are traffickers too. It's not just men who are traffickers. You can have a woman who's a trafficker, and a woman goes in the restroom, sees that sign, she's either going to rip it right down or she's going to make sure that her girls don't go in there. Yeah.
Can I ask, what is the action taking place about the market for these types of, I'm talking about the sex trafficking? Is there an addition, we're talking about after it happens, but what's happening to the people who are consumers of this?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because there is more talk about we need to really address the consumers. We need to address the demand side. If we can do something with the demand side, then maybe that would be a more effective approach instead of trying to. But law enforcement really wants to break down the criminal entity, right? I mean, that's law enforcement's approach, because that's what they look at. But it's very interesting because I did, in my conference last fall that I held, we do have in Delaware, we do have a Division Department of Justice that is working on looking at the demand side and crafting legislation and breaking down the demand side. There are pockets in the country that are doing this, but it's not a cohesive whole yet. But there are pockets of the country that are looking at this. But it's a huge problem, and it would take a lot more effort on everybody's side. So, but it's a very good question. I'm really glad you raised it.
Dr. Bishop, I have a question for you. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your research, because it seems like you know all these people personally, so you obviously have met them. You talk about going to different countries and studying this. Can you tell us a little bit about your method of research and how you've really kind of dug into this topic of human trafficking?
Well, I don't really go to different countries to meet people who have been trafficked. The research that I share with you are research articles. I do a lot of literature reviews, and the people that I've met are people who are from the US. The people I've had as keynote speakers are people I have found online or through connections. And there are people I've met and gone and talked to, and I've interviewed. And I have asked them to either be webinar presenters or keynote speakers. I have a very interesting one that I've already sourced for my conference next fall. It's a gentleman who, should I tell you? Because my conference will be face-to-face and hybrid online. He's a gentleman who actually was sent to prison for killing his abuser. But he's now out. But it's going to be very interesting. So I'll keep you posted. I'll keep you all posted, because you'll be able to register for that conference online. But I don't know. It's just luck of the draw, I guess. It's just people have gotten to know me and know that this is work that I'm doing on raising awareness. I do believe that raising awareness serves an important function, because raising awareness can lead to action. It leads to action. And when you get involved in action, then it leads to changes in policies and legislation. And I have been fortunate enough to see that happen in Delaware, but I've also been fortunate enough to see that happen in other places. So I encourage everybody, if this is something you're interested in, is to please take it on. But it's a difficult topic to take on. There are plenty of times that I have to step away from it for a while. There are plenty of times that I've said, no, the next couple of months, I can't make any presentations, because you get involved in it and you talk to people and you just, it's emotionally impacts you. You can't be a human being and not be affected by what somebody else has gone through, right? So you have to be able to, have some self-protection. But, I do what I can to raise awareness, and then I try to get other people to do their part too.
Thank you.
I do have an undergraduate certificate program in human trafficking awareness, and I'm so pleased to say that I've had probably 400 or 500 students graduate from that certificate program, and they've all gotten jobs within the Department of Health and Human Services or to corrections or different, even within business and industry. And they have been able to recognize situations and able to take that knowledge, spread it around to other people. So that's an important function as well.
Yeah, I have a
Thank you. And was there another question for Dr. Bishop?
Yes, I have. Thank you. I apologize for being late, but this is just really amazing to hear this of the time I've been here. Dr. Bishop, do you feel, or maybe this is totally separate from what you're presenting, that there's any correlation or any relationship between human trafficking and sex trafficking and kidnapping for other reasons?
Well, you know, I don't know because I don't have the data. Cases have come out from my FBI friends colleagues. There have been some cold cases in which somebody has disappeared. A teenager disappeared like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And they're starting to pull the string on this now because could this have been an instance where somebody disappeared and wound up being trafficked? I mean, we don't know. We don't know. We can't make a for sure case. But it's very interesting because, as I mentioned, a lot of victims of trafficking will not go back to their families because they've been so indoctrinated that you're now a piece of, you know what, nobody will want you anymore. But there have been, according to my FBI friends, some cases where somebody, after many years, has shown up. They've not necessarily gone back to their families, but they've been tracked down and found out that, yes, this person, you know, wound up in such unfortunate circumstances. And now they're no longer being trafficked, but they're just in that life because they can't envision getting themselves out of it. Mm. I'll tell you, there's a video clip somewhere. Who's that celebrity, that woman who talked about trafficking? I can see her face, but her name escapes me.
Mila?
No.
Are you thinking about Demi Moore, Ashton Kutcher?
No. I think her name begins with
Maybe
an A.
Angelina Jolie?
No.
No.
Somebody, I can see her face. And in that clip, she catches up with somebody that she had met when she first started the human trafficking work. And she asked the woman, it's a couple years later, she follows up and she says, "How are you doing?" And the woman is, "Oh, she looks horrible. She looks really tired and worn out." And she says, "Are you tired to come in? Are you ready to come in now?" And the woman says, "I'm tired. I'm so tired of this. I'm so tired." And then she said, "Are you ready to come in?" She said, "I'll give you a ride. I'll take you somewhere and you can rest and you can give all this up." And the woman says, "No, I can't do it. I can't do it. This is where I have to be." I mean, what do you do with that, right? So it's such a waste of human life and waste of talent. So that's why it's important for us to know this. I mean, once you know about this, you can't turn a blind eye to it. You can't be human and turn a blind eye to it once you're aware of this. And that's the other important factor. Suppose it was somebody you knew. Suppose it was your grandchild or your son or your daughter or your cousin or your neighbor's kid, or just suppose it was somebody that you knew in your community. It's just, how could you possibly turn a blind eye to a situation like that? Anyway, I want to
Dr.
thank you all
Bishop?
so very much. You've been a fantastic audience, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm sure you have other things to do. So. Did I cut somebody off?
Thank you so much, Dr. Bishop. Do you have time for one more question or no?
Absolutely. I will hang on for as long as you want me to. And Shannon, did you just have something that you were sharing? I was kidnapped and emotional similarities are amazing. Vivian. That was Vivian. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry, Vivian. Call me if you ever want to talk. I'll be a listening ear.
Would love to have your contact information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. question away. I'm here as long as you need me.
Dr.
Thank you.
Bishop, can you hear my question?
I can.
Okay. I noted, thanks for such an outstanding presentation. I noticed in the area of sexual trafficking that one of the key areas seems to be the movement of population from one country to another country. And of course, they're much more vulnerable. Is there any particular country that people are more likely to come from as they move into another country? And again, you're dealing with an element of vulnerability there.
Well, they have determined, Department of Homeland Security and the International Labor Organization has determined a whole global pattern of trafficking. I didn't have time for all of that today. I mean, the presentation I normally give is like 170 some slides long.
Sure.
But from Southeast Asia, a lot of the women and children are trafficked to Europe, Western Europe. From South America and Mexico, a lot of those people are trafficked into the US and Canada. From the former Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc, the Russian the Russian countries, they will traffic them into Western Europe and the US and Canada. A lot of the people from Africa are also trafficked into Europe. So there's strong hubs of trafficking in Western Europe, but then that also crosses over into the US and Canada a lot.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Bishop. I think we will wrap up the question and answer session. I have just a couple of updates to share with you all about the next two speaker series sessions. But again, Dr. Bishop, thanks for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us about this important issue. It's really been enlightening and motivating to learn more about this. I want to thank all of the attendees for being here as well. Thank you to our board president, Dr. Kinsella. Thank you, Allison Knox, for making these arrangements for us. And thank you all of the attendees. I will share my screen here real quickly about our next two sessions. On Wednesday, let's see here. Oops. May 3rd, we do have a session coming up, which will be led by Richard Gregory Johnson III of the University of San Francisco, and he will speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And let's see, the session after that will be on Friday, August 9th, on the topic of launching a successful Pi Gamma Mu chapter. We have had a stellar chapter at Virginia Commonwealth University just get started, and Stephen Burkharth and Deirdre Condit will be our speakers for that presentation. This event will be placed on our YouTube channel, which is listed here, or you can check our website and click on speaker series. We'll have a link to the YouTube up there as well. That'll take a little bit of time to get up, but it will be there. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you all again for being here. I loved meeting all of you and look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Wonderful. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.